you have been told by Gualtiero that the most important determinant of new product success or failure is random events. Mental invention apparently doesn't make a difference. Trend identification doesn't make a difference. So what are we doing here? If random events are so important, can we control random events? No. We can play with random events, we cannot control. So what I'm talking about is exactly this issue of whether we are able to identify some grammar or some pattern behind what apparently is randomness. That is, behind creativity, when good new ideas suddenly appear in our mind and we do not recognize where do they come from, and we don't understand why we got these ideas, and we attribute all of this to exactly random events or randomness. Meetings, people that gave us some insights, our own thinking, some which is random. Okay? Now, this issue is currently hotly debated in those that study innovation. And one of the most recent books by actually a colleague at MIT says, okay, innovation is a storm. So what does this image tell you? I think a couple of you may be familiar with that presentation I did at the PhD Plus. Storm tells you something completely unpredictable. You are in the middle of a dynamics you cannot control at all. Everything seems exactly random, in the sense that it's out of your control and you only can rely on external events. Now, what these authors are telling you is that that's not true. The storm has a dynamics which cannot be controlled, but internal elements, actually the physics of the storm, can be understood and possibly in the future can also be controlled or a little bit manipulated in such a way to, for example, move and to avoid a storm killing people or destroying a city. So the overall storm is completely chaotic and dynamic, but internal mechanisms that make the flow of air moving this way are bound to be understood and controlled. So my issue is to think about whether we see something similar in innovation. Do we see, as the famous Shakespeare verse tell, do we see method? Do we see method in madness? Do we see something that is we can understand that takes place within the storm, within the dynamics of creativity? Now, this is the object of a, if you want, a discipline which is now working very hard on the science of cognition, and something that is closer to the speeches this morning. Lot of cognitive psychology experiments, some neuroscience of creativity, lot of stories and anecdotes about companies, inventors, and new product development. So if you want, it's not really a science of innovation, it's something in a mixed discipline. And I want to discuss this with you for a while. And my suggestion is that we can learn a lot by looking at the way in which our mind creates new ideas, really creative ideas, by using some of these patterns: recombination, negation, analogy, and abstraction. And I want to work with you a little bit on these four general patterns that govern, in my view, what we do when suddenly new ideas come from. For those few of you that have been looking at this presentation at the PhD Plus, I want to ask you more effort in finding new examples in addition to the ones I will be introducing. So what I want to suggest you is to explore this area. Recombination. From your presentations before, I can already see examples of that. Recombination involves the use or reuse of existing components, in general words, to find a new solution. Okay, very trivial example: eBay combines a lot of existing technologies to combine a new solution. What is crucial for the combination is that the elements of the combination are already available to everybody, but the combination of them is new. The combination or recombination of them is something that people have never been able to find. So this is what people, for example, from IDEO always tell you. Innovation starts with your eyes, meaning that innovators watch what everybody else watches, but sees what nobody sees. So in a sense, there is something new here. Just a few examples. We know from the history of technology that the invention of the printing press was actually a combination between a technology to make molds, which was done by Gutenberg from his family to do the cutting punches for coins, combined, and then the movable technique to move the letters came from this technology, combined and to move on the matrix, combined with a very traditional screw press that was used in agriculture, actually in doing wine or oil, as we have been seeing in the museum. Very old technology to press. And he was able to identify the opportunity to combine the press of the sheets of paper with the movable letters. A famous technologist in the French Revolution was Jean-Baptiste de Gribeauval. He was able to standardize the overall weaponry production in France to make all weapons and guns interoperable, to standardize all components in such a way that they could exchange spare parts everywhere in Europe when the army was moving them. Now, what is crucial for our discussion is recombination random? As the comment from Professor Fantoni from his source, from his article, stated. Is recombination random? Is something that comes to your mind randomly? If this were the case, think a little bit about that. How many possible combinations among the elements you are looking at, you are working around, would be to be explored? If it were random, it means that your mind goes and examines all possible combinations of elements. Is that the way in which our mind works? I think that that's not the case. This is a famous quotation from a philosopher stating that actually it's like a random combination. But if it is where, I have an argument about that. A very strange argument. So you will apologize for this kind of argument. And my argument is as follows. When do you see an example of imagination based on combination and recombination? And if you look at imagination, this means something that is not necessarily true in the physical world. You can invent something that is just in your mind, in your imagination, in the literature, or in art. So imagination is something that if you put in the literature or art, is not bound to be true in the physical world. So it's virtually unlimited. You can invent whatever you want. Now, animals, since the antiquity, have been manipulated and recombined by humans in many ways to create imaginary animals we are familiar with. From the Minotaur to Chimera to Sirens. In the Middle Age, you can see a lot of monsters like this in miniatures. You can really see the bestiary, big books on this kind of animals, and up to modern literature from Jorge Luis Borges, who wrote a famous, very important book on imaginary animals. Now, my argument is that if you combine animals, you have an unlimited number of possibilities. You can combine any part of their anatomy, any part of their features, and you can get an enormous amount of possibilities. Why don't we see these possibilities? If you look at all the animals you can list in your experience of art, there are a few dozens. Borges is slightly more than 100. Very few. Why is this the case? If recombination were really random and you were exploring all the possibilities, that would not be the reality. So let me give an example of a recombinant innovation which is not random. This gentleman, so this is a statement by an interesting book on the myths of innovation. It says, okay, most people say just combine. That's not true. Innovators don't just combine at random, they have a mental model. They have something that constrains the way in which we recombine. Now, give you an example. This gentleman, you now are in Tuscany. Maybe you come from Sicily or Rome or Iran or whatever. But if you are in Tuscany, you must know something about wine production. That's something of the culture that is important to see. This gentleman is just dead a few months ago. Is an enologist. So is a person caring about the wine production. And he was famous for having invented some of the most famous wines in Tuscany, Sassicaia, Tignanello, and Solaia, and also in Sardinia. Maybe you are not familiar. I've never been able to taste these wines because a bottle of Sassicaia is around 200 euros, 250 euros, according to the years, even more. Okay, so very expensive top wines. Now, what is his story? He actually combined things. It's a very fascinating story that I will tell you very shortly, comes when the owner of the countryside in Bolgheri, which is south of Tuscany, came from a completely different region, which is Piedmont. Marchese Incisa della Rocchetta. He married a lady, again from noble family, Clarice della Gherardesca, and then became the owner of San Guido in Bolgheri. Okay? So you see randomness? Yes. They got married from Piedmont to Tuscany. Maybe something random. Okay? But then what happened? This gentleman wanted to bring to Tuscany the vineyards that are produced in Piedmont and in France, mainly the Cabernet. Now in Tuscany, no one has ever been producing Cabernet for centuries, because in Tuscany the dominant wine is Sangiovese, is the one which is behind Chianti, right? And then he hired the Takis guy, the young enologist, to see, can we do this combination? Okay? And now, if you study the story, which is told in a number of, let's say, books on wine, you have to get some understanding of that. It appears to be an incredibly difficult story of doing this combination. There was no tradition of Cabernet. The Sangiovese was completely different autochthon production. The French type was considered completely unreliable. the Bulgari area had no tradition at all. Okay, you come with some novelty and people say, oh, sorry, we have been, we cannot do here. This is not a good place for wine, okay? When bringing the Cabernet, the plant is completely different. It's a small one, not a big one, so you have to grow the plant and to take the grapes in a different attitude, and the workers were completely different attitudes about that. And finally, you do the fermentation in barrique. Again, something never done before in Tuscany. What is also interesting is that initially this recombination was a complete failure. What is now one of the world's most expensive wine has been a complete failure for years. Because the combination of Cabernet to the south of Tuscany ground, which was very, very dry, very hard, was giving a flavor which is not at all was palatable, was good. So what they did is to ask a number of friends that are close to Gualtiero notion, ask someone with a different perspective to make meetings in closed door to help them to improve on the wine. And to tell them in a nasty way, but friendly way, that is, without telling outside, without giving them shame. They are noble families. They are growing wines. They don't want to be put in a shame outside to improve the quality of the wine. And they did this for years. Before, eventually in 78, the Decanter, which is a famous magazine specialized in wine tasting, gave them the first prize. And from that period, 78, is now years after years becoming one of the most celebrated. Now, recombination is not random. Can you give me in a couple of minutes, no more, if this idea that innovation or creative ideas come from recombination? Can you give me a couple of examples? One is from the world around us, companies, technologies, ideas.
Every variation of the use of Nutella.
Sorry?
The use of Nutella.
Okay.
In everything that you can imagine. Every use of Nutella with whatever you can imagine.
Okay.
From chicken to crepes to ice cream to
Okay.
coffee. I mean, I've even seen recipe books with Nutella combined with all sorts of.
Okay. You may know that the examples of chocolate with liquor or coffee, Ferrero themselves had the problem of extending the way of using Nutella, and they invented the Ferrero Rocher, actually, from this idea of combining Nutella with the traditional chocolate. Okay, so very good example. Other examples. Okay, we know that on the mobile phone, the touch screen is not actually the technology that was used on the touch screen. Was the capacitive one, which was different from the one used on the touch screen. So at least in the Apple and in the iPhone, the technology was not taken or recombined from traditional screens. Was a new one, right?
They took the screen from the military and the phone from another person, and they combined this together.
Okay, not with traditional TV screen, but from the capacitive
military,
technology,
yes.
which is a different one. Okay, that's a good example. Okay, maybe those of you that are talking about the dishwasher, the first one of you that commented about having a barcode on a dishwasher product, maybe are, if you want, combining two ideas on the same device, for example. Let's go ahead and see the other ones, and at the end maybe we have a better idea of possible ways in which ideas come from. The second one is negation. Negation is a situation where, faced with a problem, you negate, you deny something important, typically something crucial in the product, and you explore what happens if you eliminate it. One famous example is the Cirque du Soleil, which is a famous circus in which the most important element of the circus has been eliminated, the animals. What is a circus about? It's about living animals going, the lions, the elephants. Okay? Cirque du Soleil eliminated all the animals, right? And is now a worldwide famous company to do entertainment around the world. Very expensive ticket if you want. Huh? Now, I want to give you another series of examples. Colombo. This is something that is no longer on TV. Right? It's an old series. But if you have had any opportunity to see that, it's very interesting because it's a kind of detective completely at the opposite of what you can expect from a movie, from a series, from a TV series on detective. For example, he enters the scene of the movie late. Sometimes you may wait 20 minutes before seeing detective. And the murder is, on the contrary, shown at the very beginning, and the killer is already visible. So there is no suspense about who is the killer. The killer is visible from the very beginning. And the suspense is completely reversed, is on the intellectual ability of Colombo to demonstrate that the killer is exactly the killer that did the murder, right? And a number of other negations. He looks shabby, absent-minded. You don't think that a detective could be absent-minded, of course, right? Now, negation is very powerful. And I will now go very fast to give you if you want, some intuition about a completely different region, which is not innovation or technology, but art. And creativity, many people, including myself, believe that there is something in common between the creativity in technology and innovation and the creativity in art. Although in art, of course, you don't have to realize something, say, feasible or marketable, and in technology you have. But at some deep level, probably some of the ways of thinking of really creative people are similar. So we can learn a lot about what happens here. And if you do this, one of the most interesting things in the art of last century was negation. Was artists taking the position to negate, to deny something that was essential to the art before them. Okay? Now again, negate something or deny something is not per se fruitful or productive. Who are those that always say no? The children. When we were children enjoy saying no and experimenting something opposite. And of course, that's a part of creativity. We experience to break the rule, to say no, to experiment when something is negated. But of course, we easily understand not all negations are creative. Not all no produce good ideas. So again, the challenge is to understand when negation produces creativity. And I will show you examples very, very shortly. This is a famous libretto by Dürer, and what you see here is of course, the astonishing realism. There is an entire lecture by Lacan on the sensation of looking at this rabbit, right? Now you see Vasily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich at the end of last century or 20th century stating, well, I don't want just to reduce or distort objects, I want do away with them altogether. My art is not about realism and representation of reality. We would like to produce art directly from abstract elements, the formation of sign instead of the repetition of nature. And this is Mondrian, the famous Broadway Boogie Woogie. This is Kandinsky. So, big part of 20th century art. Second, this is the famous ideal city, Renaissance. You live in a room here where all these books are basically on Renaissance, the period of Leonardo. And of course, the central perspective was crucial here. You have Raffaello Sanzio in Brera and Milano with the marriage of Mary. And there are many ways of depicting the central perspective of Leon Battista Alberti and Brunelleschi. You have Masaccio with the Trinity, and again you see how deep is the representation of perspective. Now you have a guy that was actually a friend of Pablo Picasso. They were living together for a while and say, okay, central perspective is like if you see people this way, it's like having a man with only one eye. What does it mean? It's a famous sentence to say traditional paintings took just one perspective. I want to represent reality from many perspectives at once, simultaneously, in the same drawing, in the same painting, right? And again, this is Braque, the violin, and of course, this is Picasso, the Demoiselle d'Avignon, which is unanimously considered by all historians the single most important painting in last century, right? Number 3, color. This is Giotto in Padua, the blue of the sky. And then you have an artist called Matisse stating, well, we don't want to see the colors as representative reality. We want to see color as abstract elements. And you see here, the Icaro, the gerb, completely different use of color. Number 4, Michelangelo. You see how the history of art as the artist working directly, physically, materially on the material, here on marble. And then you have a guy called Marcel Duchamp saying, well, can we do something which is not made of art, that is not made by myself, by my manual work, but is mostly on another materials. And this is Marcel Duchamp doing the ready-made. So pieces of art which are made of already existing pieces. This is the most famous fountain, which is again one of the most important pieces of art in last century. 2 other examples, Piero della Francesca, about the painting, the table, the canvas, the way in which pieces of art are considered. And then you have another important artist in last century called Jackson Pollock saying, well, my paintings do not have a center. This has a center, I don't have a center. And Jackson Pollock art was dripping color on huge canvases in this way. He was painting by dripping lines of pieces of color on the canvases, on enormous canvases to be put on an entire wall. Okay. And finally, we are all struck by the beauty of Botticelli Venere, and we see this as a unique representation. And you have Andy Warhol saying, okay, I want to do an art which is not unique, but is made by reproduction of reproductions, because we live in an industrial civilization. We can reproduce, we can do pictures, and this is what he did. This is the famous Marilyn, and this is a collection of his most famous paintings, all made by photographs which color on top of them. Now, what is the negation? If you want, you see some of the most important issues in art: realism, central perspective, description, manual work, the table, and you do the opposite. Okay? Now, this is a fascinating way of looking at history of last century, but then the question is, well, when is a negation creative? When is the negation producing something good? Can we, for 1 minute, put our mind on this question? Can we see examples where negating something gives you creative ideas, or perhaps, in your experience, by doing the opposite of what was considered normal, gave you an insight?
Maybe in Psycho. In Psycho, the film.
Psycho.
The film
What?
of Hitchcock. It's the first film in which the main characters die before the half part of the film, and all the producers didn't didn't agree with this innovation, because for them the public is too much.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting to know that Hitchcock was actually had some training in engineering, and it's considered an example of creativity in engineering the movies. Okay, and in designing in a very, very intellectual way, the way in which the movies are done. So good examples, and Psycho is of course one big negation.
So staying with the art theme, but bringing it to, staying with the art theme, but bringing it to a very contemporary example would be Richard Prince, who took some pop musician Instagram photos, printed them out, wrote down something, and as an appropriation went and sold it for like $100,000 US, and then so it's a negation of copyright, right? Because he took a public display, made it a private asset for sale, and then in reaction to that, the artist went and took his appropriation, reproduced it, and did the same thing to him. So you have a double negation, and then that artist went and then sold it for like $9 in reaction. So you have this sort of commentary of recombination, double negation, and then this sort of social commentary taking place.
Okay, so we are building up examples. When we get more familiar with this, I understand, very abstract way of describing things. I fully understand it's not obvious to find examples because we are really using very abstract categories. Now, number 3 is called analogy. And again, this is very powerful. It's a way of bringing a solution which has been developed in a completely different domain to the domain you are working on. Okay. It's also called crossover. It's based on the understanding that behind the superficial difference among problems, there is a similar underlying structure. So the problem, again, following the suggestions of Gualtiero, to decompose, to analyze the problem are similarities. But these similarities are not discovered easily. People don't understand, don't see similarities. The creative mind discovers similarities, discovers deep structures of the problem that are similar and allow this jump, bringing a solution from one domain to a completely new domain. I can give you, well, if you look at the hospitals, today the management of a surgery room is managed with algorithms that come from logistics in harbors, because the optimization of the dock from the entry of ships and the logistic stuff has some similarity with the notion of bringing patients into the surgery room, doing an operation, controlling for any kind of safety regulation, and then moving away, and then using and maximizing the use of surgery room. What is the relation between an hospital and the harbor? Nothing, unless you understand that this problem is similar. For example, in operational research term. Now, examples. If you have been in Barcelona and in Casa Mila, La Pedrera, you go on the ground and you see these astonishing arcs. What is the geometry behind that? The geometry behind that is this: is that Gaudí, the architect, had been studying for years the catenaria shape. That is, if you take an arch made this way between 2 points, the geometry is not round. Is due to the gravity, due to the weight of the rope. The geometry between 2 points is described by this curve, the catenaria. And what he did after understanding is to reverse. This is by the gravity, and he said, do the other way around. Then the gravity from the building goes to the ground, following the 2 arches of the catenaria. And the properties that are from the gravity, which go down, can be exploited to sustain the arc. This is what you can see within the Sagrada Familia. Here is another concept that he took from the notion that to make strong columns, you may have a node in this way that sustains the branches of the column. What do they have in common? This is, of course, now visible if you take the nose of the Martin Pescatore and then of the train. And the story behind that is interesting. It's a Japanese engineer that in the 90s was studying how to reduce the acoustic pollution, the bang produced by the train entering into the gallery. Okay? And what was this bang from? What was the origin of the acoustic effect? Was a sudden change from a low density to a high density fluid. Because in the gallery, of course, due to the compression, the air cannot go left and right when the train moves, right? So you enter from a situation where the flows of air can go free outside of the train to a situation where you are constrained. But no one had understood the analogy between this problem, moving from a low density to high density fluid, to the same activity that is birds do. He was studying for passion ornithology, and as many people know, noted that these birds, when they go into the water, they go very neatly. They actually don't do turbulence on the water, and they do this for catching the fish, of course, for fishing. And the question was, how do they manage to be so aerodynamically perfect, to move from air to water? And from air to water is a similar problem, from low density to high density fluid. And the solution was having a long part was entering the high density fluid some fractions of seconds before of the body, and creating the space for the body of the bird to enter. And that was the origin of the innovation in the train. Thomas Edison invented the kinetoscope, the father of movies, after the phonograph. He said, okay, if you can reproduce the sound, can we also reproduce the motion? And there's another example I like very much, because I'm addicted to coffee, which is how did we move from the Naples coffee machine to the Bialetti, the one you may have in your house if you are an Italian. And the Napoletana machine was not efficient for a number of reasons. It was risky of burning and was consuming too much powder. Now, what they did is the founder was Alfonso Bialetti, and the way in which this idea came about is by observing women washing the clothes in the river or in a lake using a technology in which you have boiling water and then ash and soap on top. And then when the water came out by temperature, then they took the ash and soap, and that was the cleaning of the clothes. There was a power for cleaning the clothes. And then Bialetti said, okay, if we can do the same, not with ash and soap, but with coffee, maybe we can do something that is valuable. And then he invented the notion of the mocha. He did this in aluminium, because aluminium is very malleable, can be done, and this is also close to silver in appearance. So he made the first mocha express, and he patented here the idea. The barcode, which is an enormous innovation, some of you are using that, was invented upon analogy with the idea of the Morse code, with the binary and the language that was clearly stated in the Morse code, and the idea was to have a visual picture that was could be completely mapped into a language close to the Morse code. And that's my preferred example, and some of you have seen that many times because it's my obsession. Another thing that you find in Tuscany is an important shipbuilding industry, in particular yacht, that is luxury kind of ships. And this is one of the best examples. It has been created 10 years ago by a company called Perini, and it's called Maltese Falcon. And you can imagine how many images are behind Falcon, Maltese Falcon, the whole story of the Falcon. And you see three big sails. You see how big is this ship. But then you can also see it this way, or this way. Okay? Now, the question is, well, if we see how big are the sails, the question is how are they disappear, and thinking a while, you guess the right answer, which is they are rolled and preserved into the horizontal structures. Okay, so they're designed to host the whole sail in a rolled way, and everything is done electronically without the crew doing the manual work with the traditional sail ship. And the idea of Fabio Perini was to design a ship that was to be managed by two people. Imagine this enormous big ship. So all the technology was designed to allow for two people to manage the ship. Okay. Now, how was that possible? how was this idea, this creative idea, put in the market? Maybe it was the obsession of Fabio Perini to have a ship that could be managed by few people, or something else. If you study a little bit the story, you discover the following: that before doing ships, the same entrepreneur, Fabio Perini, had created a large company called Fabio Perini, who is now still in Lucca, now has been acquired by a German group, and Fabio Perini was world leader in paper machine, and paper in this particular segment of the industry is done by rolling enormous amount of paper in large rolls, and in doing this, the key technology is a fast rolling of a very long piece of paper that comes from the preparation of the paper. And in doing this, the key point is to have a fast rolling without breaking and without imperfections, because otherwise, if you do something wrong, the quality of the roll diminishes. So you need an enormous expertise in technology to roll. Okay? Now, here is the analogy. The technology in rolling paper gives you the competence, the skill, the ideas about rolling the sails in the ship. A completely different industry, completely different application, but an analogy in the underlying kind of problem to be solved. So analogy, again, is very powerful. Just one example to control that you are alive for the last few minutes of the presentation.
The technology of echography in medical applications come from the sonar military application of sonar.
Okay.
By submarine during the Second World War, I guess. Or maybe it's a recombination.
Maybe both are true. These rules are not exclusive of each other; they can be used together. Okay.
Gloves for the feet.
Gloves for the feet.
Yeah, actually a new product has been developed a few years ago. The shape is actually, the idea is taking gloves for hands and putting into your feet. Yeah. And the result is an amazing product for...
Vibram.
Yeah.
So Vibram is the company that
produces
Vibram.
Yeah. Mainly producing rubber, and this product is amazing for sailing. So it is very related to Fabio Perini.
Okay. So it's a shoe that is completely adherent to the
as the shape
feet.
Of the fingers.
Oh yes. Good idea. Okay, let me move to the final one. The final one is the most difficult. It's something very rare, if you want, but some of the radical innovations share this approach. Maybe the two speeches of this morning have something close to this. My idea is that in some cases the innovator looks for a general solution, that is asking what are in general the properties of a solution. Which features must a solution for this problem must have in general? Very generally, in very abstract terms. So by abstraction I mean a cognitive ability to abstract from the solutions, from the details, from the technology, in order to be able to think about the way in which solutions solve a particular problem in abstract terms. We like to say in functional terms. that is representing the way in which a solution does something to solve a problem. I will give you a couple of examples. One is the Wright brothers, 1903, the Kitty Hawk famous flight. The two brothers, Wilbur and Orville, and they started a year before to fly with a glider. And between 92 and 93, they did some 700 to 1,000 flights. Persistence. But what is interesting is that that was not the only effort. Before them, literally dozens, maybe more than 100, inventors had tried to do the flight in both Europe and US. Mostly in France, in UK and the US. Many of them design a variety of solutions for gliders like that and try to fly. Some of them actually died in their experiments. Some of them were injured. There was plenty of people. There were contests. The newspapers publish regularly news about people trying to solve the issue of human flight. And as you have seen in this museum, this comes from understanding by Leonardo that the human flight could not be like the animals and could not be managed by human strength. But how they were able to find a solution? Historians of technology, they've been studying that using their diaries, their written notes. They reconstructed their cognitive work. What they learned time after they failed to do the right flight. What was there? And they came to the conclusion that they were the first one to have an abstract representation of the condition for a man-controlled flight to come into existence. And these conditions are very generally three. You need a structure, you need a propulsion, and you need a control. And most solutions before either lacked propulsion or lacked control or both of them. But they were the first one to understand the importance of control to keep the aerodynamic stability of the plane and to avoid the stall, to avoid the situation where you lose your aerodynamic stability and you just fall and maybe you die. So from the history of their innovation, it's clear that they were superior to any other inventor of their period in this abstraction, in their understanding of the deep, if you want, physical conditions for the flight to be managed. And another example still taken from aircraft industry. Unfortunately, it's in the military side, but it's interesting for the notion. This is the stealth. This is the airplane that is no visible from radars or from other rays. It was developed by a skunk works, meaning a close team of inventors of very high quality. They were charged by Lockheed to study a difficult challenge, to design an aircraft which was able to fly without being detected by any tool, right? And again, there are a number of books telling this story. Any existing geometry of planes did not solve this problem. Okay, and the existing geometries are a typical aerodynamic wing, kind of angled wing with the body of the airplane, even in fighters. Where did this geometry come from? You can see this is more a diamond than a body with wings. It's completely different from existing geometries of an airplane. And the story is that a people from this team actually translated from the Russian a paper by a mathematician. And this mathematician, Pyotr Yefimtsev, gave a mathematical demonstration of what is an abstract geometry to be in order for that to minimize the reaction to incoming vectors of any force or radiation you can imagine. So there was a completely theoretical paper on a completely unuseful issue about a geometric problem. But then the people in this team were able to identify immediately the analogy between that geometrical solution in mathematical terms and their own problems. And then they started to say, okay, we are going to design the aircraft in a different way. And initially, the only possibility for them was that their boss was powerful enough in Lockheed to get the money to do this design. Because all other engineers in aeronautics will have killed them. Because this is not the kind of geometry you can accept at all in aeronautics, because it's completely unstable, and at that time there was no demonstration of the properties. So again, it's a kind of radical innovation that comes from abstraction, from creative people that reflects very thoroughly on the general conditions for a solution to exist. Okay, and my claim is that sometimes innovators share this view. So their ability to think thoroughly and in abstract terms to their innovation, and to move back and forth from abstract to concrete, from the functional representation to the design of specific solution. And in my understanding of creativity, this ability to keep in mind abstraction, abstract representations, and to move down to solutions, and to go up and go down continuously, and keeping in the mind separate alternative representations is crucial to get new ideas and possibly radically new ideas. Now, in the real world, you can also combine several ways. For example, my interpretation of the Walkman was an abstract, because as it is written in the biography of Akio Morita said, I want a device that allows people to listen music all day. And if you think for a while, all day is impossible. It was impossible in the 70s, because you don't have batteries that long 24 hours, and if you go all day, you move, you cannot plug your device everywhere. You move, you are in town and working, and it's impossible. So what is the abstract representation of a device that allows people to listen music all day? So there was abstraction, was a negation, because that device has not the recording function. And initially the engineers in Sony said, no, we are not going to do this recorder. We are proud of having a top technology in listening and recording. And a recorder has to record. So you have to put a big battery for the recording of music elsewhere. That was a typical use of a recorder, to record from discs, for example, music, to be listened afterwards, and then a recombination. So maybe you may have an example, but I'm just skipping to the end. I'm just trying to finish with this remark. What do artists and innovators have in common? In my understanding, artists see, they have an internal vision. They see, if you want, in a space of forms. Forms meaning geometries, materials, colors, shapes, grades, whatever makes the form. In my understanding, innovators see in a multidimensional space of functions in which they see the possibility conditions, mainly from a thorough physical understanding of what can and cannot be done, the design principle, and the system of use, that is, the users, the social or market dimension of why are you doing something, for whom, for what kind of problem, for what kind of benefit, for what kind of value the market can appreciate. Now, if this is true, I just finished with this interesting evidence I found. It has been discovered that if you compare Nobel Prize winners in last century to scientists that were in the same period approximately performing in the same way in their scientific discipline, you discover that those that were able to win the Nobel Prize were from 2 to 22 times more likely to do also artistic activity. From music to drawing and painting, from craft, even, craftsmanship, electronics, woodworking, to writing stories, to performing, dancer, magician, amateur. Where is our friend that is a dancer? We had a group before when one of the declaration was, I'm a great dancer. If this is true, what is interesting is try to understand how artists and innovators share some ways of thinking and try to train ourselves or to be alert to the way in which we can address issues. And I'm pretty sure that if we go ahead in the next couple of weeks, maybe also on your ideas, we can recognize some of these patterns or combination among them about some of the ideas you have in your company. So I think we have to stop here because at 6 they are moving into this room. So let me be clear, this is the only day in which we do, if we want, only lectures, right? From tomorrow, the overall structure of the day will be one in which we do practice. So we will have an alternation between lectures and laboratory all day. Tomorrow you will receive more details about the planning of the next few days. The first week of the course, as you have seen, is also laboratory in a real sense, in physical terms, using machines and learning how to do work in the physical world, because we have given the school an approach which is completely action-driven and learning by experience. So this day, however, was, if you want, more inspirational. Of course, this morning as was a wonderful start, and these 2 presentations from methods and creativity want to give you food for your thought, not necessarily immediately usable, but possibly useful for your project. Thank you.